I remember Ragini Nayak, who's right now in Congress and very much their spokesperson. So I remember interviewing her and then asking her, what is the challenge? She said that the only challenge I'm facing is that when I go to boys' hostels, they say you have our vote if you shake my hand. You don't give them enough tickets, so they don't get enough experience and they don't win. So again, you don't give them tickets and they don't get into the legislative process. Why do we need reservation? Is not just because of the women qualitatively what they bring to the table, but also if I represent 50% of the population, why shouldn't I represent my interests within the within parliament and legislative bodies?
Namaste to everyone. We are here to discuss the book She, the Leader. We're going to discuss women in politics. Today, early morning, I was in conversation with Miss Nidhi Sharma, who's written this fantabulous book uh, profiling the women leaders. In three sections, I would divide the book as I thought how your book projected those leaders. One section is of those leaders who paved the way for the future women leaders. The second comes in those women who have fought it out on themselves, by themselves. These were the first generation women leaders, and we're going to have a full section on the first generation women leaders because I'm particularly sure not every woman, there might be some of you involved in student politics, some who are vying to be in politics by some other way, and our first generation leaders. You're not a part of the dynasty politics. The third section is that of the future ones, the leaders that we see in parliament today. Spanning all these three, different sections of women, she has not just compiled biographies. These are not just biographies that are there in the book, but it's more. It's the experiences, particularly the lived experiences, the struggles, their personal lives, their private lives, their public lives intertwined with each other, the struggles therein. And so we are in for the conversation with Miss Nidhi Sharma this evening. And my first question to her would be, while I was reading the book, why did you think whoever you chose to be in that book, why only those women and not some other women? Because we see so many other women, and this spans not just women that we see very popularly, but also women who were not, so there was a tough choice, I feel. There were women very very popular in the psyche, in the minds, in the memory of the people, and yet you chose those women also who were not very popular, but their struggles have been very very important for the book.
So, just for my audience, a very young audience here, I'd like to tell you that this book has four sections. I begin with something called The Pioneers, the women politicians who were, in the true sense, the pioneers in women politics. And then I have profiled women who inherited their politics, the section that I call the inheritors. And then there are the lone warriors who, started out. They didn't have anybody in the family or they didn't inherit their politics. And then there are the future leaders, the fourth section. So, how I chose them, because my book begins with profiles of Indira Gandhi and Sucheta Kriplani. Now, how I chose, and I'm asked this question, that how come some very vital and important leaders who went on to become chief ministers, like Rabri Devi, are not profiled? So, one of the main threads of is that runs through all the profiles is they should have won a popular election, which is why our finance minister Nirmala Sitaraman is not included in the book. So the only person included in the book who hasn't won an election is Brinda Karat, but her politics is very unique because she's really well entrenched into trade union politics and street politics. So the common thread is they should have won a popular election and they should have been members of parliament or members of legislative assemblies or councils. And that is the common thread. So some of them, like Rabri Devi, I thought had inherited her politics from Lalu Prasad Yadav. That was one of the reasons I didn't want her in the book. She's not included.
As someone who's also been a part of the youth politics, I feel optics are very, very important. Um, what are these optics, if you are to ask? For instance, in this world of social media, it's the pictures that speak a thousand words. To manage those pictures, jostling for those pictures, usually in the politics, it's always the ones who are participating in that, the political arena are the ones who are jostling for pictures. Pictures are important. Pictures sell. Pictures are what portrays you into so and so, and it profiles you into a so and so category. For women, that's, it's somehow, it's not very important and yet important, because that optics is very important, and to manage those pictures at times it gets very, very difficult to be at the right spot at the right time. So time constraints, there are so many issues, such as if there are a lot of people there, how is that woman going to be right there at that spot? All of these constraints of space, time, all of these impinge very, very sharp on women. Did you come across any of the incidents when you were profiling these women, that they ever, you know I mean, if you got to talk to them, that is, if you got to interview them, did they
So,
speak of such issues? Because I'm
so
pretty.
what?
Huh.
So what is actually, so people often ask me that, what is so great about the book? We know everything about these leaders. Everything is in the public domain, and with social media and the web, very much these profiles are already there. So what is it? So the biggest thing about the book is that most of the women profiled who are presently there in our Indian politics have given extensive interviews and talked about not just their political journeys, but also their personal ones. So, the biggest thing, as you're talking about optics, the biggest challenge that all of them thought they faced was the bias against women. Uh, I would not say that, it's very apparent now, like the way we are here today in your campuses, that wouldn't be there. But when you step into politics, I feel politics is a different world altogether, in the sense that when you are in class 11th and 12th, when you're thinking of a career in say anything in medicine, you start very early, like around 8th or the ninth, you start thinking about medicine, or in academics or anything, you want to do some research somewhere. um, Nobody talks to you for considering politics as a career option. So, politics is never something that you sit down your children and you say that, okay, so when you're thinking about medicine and you're thinking about engineering, you're thinking about STEM, uh, there is something called politics also. So, it's not a natural career choice. You step into college, like I know that DU, JNU, in Delhi, in other universities across India, in state universities as well, they have a very robust system of electoral politics. In fact, I was very recently traveling to Rajasthan for the elections, to cover the elections, and I found that there was a constituency near Barmer. There was an independent candidate, Ravinder Singh Bhati, and he had how he came into the mainstream was he defeated the candidate, the official candidate, who was supported by the Congress and more so by the chief minister Ashok Gehlot. So Ravinder Singh Bhati was the one who actually won as an independent. He won as an independent, not being not being from any party, not aligning with any party. So these systems here are very robust. I remember as a cub reporter, I was working with the Asian Age. Probably it was 2001 or 2002. I remember Ragini Nayak, who's right now in Congress and very much their spokesperson. She was fighting her first election, Dusu election, and as you said, talked about jostling for space. I remember she was, I think, on her panel, the only woman from NSUI. And for at that time, you had to go to hostels and you had to campaign till late. So I remember interviewing her and then asking her, what is the challenge? She said that, the only challenge I'm facing is that when I go to boys' hostels, they say, you have our vote if you shake my hand. So my first reaction was, so do you? Do you shake their hands? So she said, if they was, so I shake anybody's hand who comes up to me, but the way they ask, I don't like it. That kind of, she said that used to make her feel a little, she said, ganda sa lagta hai the way they say ki if you shake my hand I'm going to give you my vote. Says I don't want your vote. If you just want to shake my hand, if you want to work with me in NSUI, if you want to work with the way we want to take the Delhi University Students Union, I'm willing to do that. But from there to now, when you see this kind of the kind of struggles that a woman has to face in the political space, I feel are very different from what a man needs to face. So you don't raise an eyebrow in the political offices of parties. You don't raise an eyebrow if you see a man just hanging around at 11 p.m. But when a woman is there, she's never unchaperoned. She's always there with a male relative. Second thing is, she still, people do look back and say, what is she doing at 11 in the night? Right? So those are the different challenges that the women talk about.
You've talked of Ragini Nayak. Um, Politics is a ruthless field. It is very, very competitive. Factor in, for that matter, how many DUSU presidents do we actually know who have made it really big in the national political arena? So, it's not just for women, I think it's also for men. But when it comes to women, particularly, there are so many other factors which always are there to pull her down. And so, if a woman makes it there at the national arena, I feel that her struggle is double than that of the other people who are there. Not to say that, others are not struggling. I'm saying, politics is a very, very competitive field. It is ruthless. It doesn't pardon anyone. If you've missed out an opportunity, you have to revamp yourself and maybe face another opportunity. And you never know if you're, good enough for that opportunity to grab that opportunity. Coming to that, first generation women generally, first generation women politicians particularly face a lot of troubles, because politics is not just about contesting elections, it's about maintaining networks. Maintaining networks is not easy. It involves resources, it involves, most importantly, time. And you can only have, this reminds me of Aristotle. Aristotle, when we have to teach Aristotle in class, we do say, so he said that only the propertied, so he gave the rights of voting only to the propertied and educated men, because he said that they have time, and time is something which is very important, because that gives you time to think. So time, in politics, is something very, very precious, and you can only buy time when you don't have to work somewhere else, when you're not when you're dedicating that, time and space and resources, everything. So for a first generation politician who doesn't have that kind of a support, how do you think that these women, if you've interviewed them, then did they ever say that because you have profiled a few of the first time politicians, what were their struggles? Because that
So
has to be, yeah.
I'll talk about women who did not inherit their politics. I'll talk about the lone warriors, and then I'll come to a very interesting aspect of whether other women leaders who inherit their politics, what kind of challenges they have spoken about. So, one, let's be very clear that all women profiled thought that politics, making it out in politics, is a difficult thing to do. It's, you do need, what should I say, you do need in some manner the support of your family, because if you are married you need to have a supportive spouse, and that is like everywhere in any field. I feel that behind any successful man, woman, child, there is an entire ecosystem, and I'm going to make it absolutely gender neutral here, because of the times that we are living in. Now, what kind of challenges did all these lone warriors face? First, all of them said that the biggest thing was how to get involved with a political party. Right now, there is, if you have to apply for a job in any company, you go, you have a proper application system. You don't have that in a political party. Are there any forum, to actually go and apply? Is there a system where they could do that? No. So the only and for women more so, right? You have a students union right now. You have elections. You have elections within the college as well, and a very, as I said, a very robust electoral system. So there you can, but does it really mean students union elections, winning a students union election? Does it really mean? Does it mean that it's a springboard for a larger role in politics? What is the course taken by most women? So I'll take you back to our the way women were involved in the political system was, we had reservations initially to get about 33% women in local bodies and in panchayats, but has that organically grown into more women in legislative bodies and in parliament? No, it hasn't happened. So the challenges are how to get involved in a party, in a political party. Do you know their ideology? What does it mean when I say that I support, say, the BJP or the Congress? So there is no real place where you can say I want to be a part of the ecosystem. That was one thing that everybody talked about. Second was always being favored. I mean, no, they always thought that men are favored over them for anything. They are roped in only when there is a challenge. So Smriti Irani, if there's a very extensive interview in the book, so she does not take it as a challenge. Not even once does she speak about that challenge. She was in 2014 roped in for to fight Rahul Gandhi in Amethi. That was the first election. She lost that election. Again in 2019, she won that election. Now, why Smriti Irani? She does not make her gender as an issue. I'll take you back to Sushma Swaraj's election against Sonia Gandhi when she was roped in Bellary. Before that, she was roped in Delhi to take on Sheila Dikshit. That was the you. I don't think you guys would have remembered. That was the Pyaz election. That was the onion election. She lost to Sheila Dikshit at that time, 1998. Now, we in boardrooms there is a concept called the glass cliff, where you rope in a woman when there is, it's a difficult task and no man would own up for that task. That's called the glass cliff. So why are women roped in only when there is a difficult task to do? Why can't you give it to a man? And when you lose that election, it goes down in your what can I say, account, खाते में जैसे आप डाल देते हैं कि नहीं ये तो हार जाती हैं. So, the biggest problem that all women face across the spectrum, across political parties, is winnability. That women are not winnable. Why aren't they winnable? Why are they classified as unwinnable candidates? Because you don't give them enough opportunities to actually fight those elections and gain experience. So it's like a vicious circle that you've got women into. You don't give them enough tickets, so they don't get enough experience and they don't win. So again, you don't give them tickets and they don't get into the legislative process. Now, one thing, I'll come to the inheritors. It's not as if the women who have somebody in politics from their family do not face challenges, which was an eye opener for me when I was working on the book. Now, what happens is we think, okay, say Karunanidhi's daughter, Kani Mori, she is the chief minister's daughter. What challenges should she face? She is right now the sitting chief minister's sister. So she'll put her, finger on any constituency and she can fight an election. I have profiled Kavita Kalvakuntla, who was former Telangana Chief Minister K. Chandrasekhar Rao's daughter. Um, what challenges can she face? I mean, she is, after all, her father's daughter. So she shouldn't, right? Again, any constituency she puts her finger on, she can fight. And she will win because the party cadres will rally behind her. So, in a way, Supriya Sule. So, do you think that these women would face any challenges? No. So, logically, they shouldn't, right? But they themselves speak about um, problem areas like gender bias. Now, I found that really intriguing. Now, what kind of gender bias, would say Supriya Sule or anybody face? Now, across political spectrum, all women spoke about if there are so-called serious issues to be raised inside parliament, their male counterparts are preferred. For example, when there are bills or the budget for that matter, if you have to debate on the budget or the defense ministry related things or the economy, their male counterparts are given precedence over women. Now, in one of the interviews, Renuka Chaudhary, if you guys are familiar with her, she was the first woman and child development minister in India, and she speaks that there were times that we women were not there in parliamentary standing committees examining economic issues or in defense. We weren't there, and she said that we would ask them that come and join. They said no, we don't. Kavita Kalvakuntala, the chief minister's daughter, at that time the serving chief minister's daughter, said that I had to compete with my male counterparts because the party actually preferred my male counterparts. Same is with Kani Mori. So, what is it? What is it reflective of? How come even these inheritors face that bias? It is reflective of the larger societal norms that we think that if it comes to women's issues, only women can talk about women's issues. If I'll take you back to this debate that was happening on the criminal justice bills very recently, this parliament session, the winter session, I was covering the debate on the criminal justice bills, and the three bills were being discussed till I think 9 p.m. in Lok Sabha. Around 8:30, a woman is given a chance. And if you recall, if you've been following parliament proceedings, this was the session when the opposition was demanding that there was a security breach in parliament, and the opposition demanded a statement from the home minister, and the government was not yielding, and everybody was from the opposition was most of the majority of the MPs were suspended and they were not in the house. So this we are talking about late in the night, one day, late in the night, when everybody from the BJP, everybody present in the house is from the BJP, and they are discussing the bill. This lady from Rajasthan gets up and she said, I have been attending this debate since it started at 12 in the afternoon. The speaker was asking her, please hurry up. She said, no, I will not hurry up. You talk about women empowerment. This is 8 p.m. We have prepared for 2 days to come here and speak, and you are not allowing us to speak. So I am going to take my time. Not just her, there were two more who stood up and said, how come you allowed the men to speak? How come I was not given enough opportunity to speak? So it's all across the political spectrum. Why? Because that's how the society has been. There are not enough women in the political space, and that is why we face this. So, my brief point is, it's not just the women who are first time leaders, but women who have also inherited their politics. It's across.
So that lets me to observe that politics is a very paradoxical field, wherein you'll see those who have made it in politics will say that gender isn't actually a problem there. But we do, for whatever you've said, that even those who've made it actually do have to suffer from what is there actually with regards to gender. So whether politics is gender neutral or it factors in a lot of gender prejudices is very difficult to, because these are two viewpoints, and both the schools have very robust arguments with regards to this, whether politics is gender neutral or it is very gendered that way. So I don't know, because it took about 70 plus years for us to see that in the Cabinet Committee of Security, which is a very very important cabinet committee, we had two women. So that if optics are to matter, we saw two males and two females right there. And so it took about 70 plus years for that to happen, to just even get the optics there. So maybe it was for the first time, and I believe that with regards to reservation also, we may have just put in our baby feet there, baby steps there, that it is the first step, but this definitely cannot be the last step, and we can't be jubilant over what is required. If you could please
So
shed light
I'll
on that.
so I'll tell you. So I'll ask the very young audience this thing. So how many women do you think were there in Nehru's first cabinet? One. And how many women in today's cabinet? Two. So from 1952 to 2024, we are sitting in, we've grown from one to two. How many women were there? Let's say the percentage of Lok Sabha, first Lok Sabha, percentage of Lok Sabha, women, percentage of Lok Sabha, first Lok Sabha. Would you know that? It was 4.4%. Okay. And today we are 15%, 1 5, right? So organically, we haven't grown, right? From 4.4%, it has taken me over 70 years to come to 15%. How much longer do I have to wait for that share in power? Now, so I am often asked, why women's reservation? So I'm not going to go with data, because right now, if I were to ask the men here that, tomorrow, give your seat to the woman just because she is a woman in this college, would they be willing to? No. Then why should a member of parliament give it to a woman? So what do women as policy makers bring to the table? I think it's a very unique aspect that they bring to the table as far as policy making is concerned. So, what I've also talked about in the book is this example that Renuka Chaudhary had given while she was giving me an interview for this book. She said that, they had to start a bus service in a village from one point to another point. And she asked the women when, what time should the bus service be introduced? What should be the timing? And the women, calculated and they said, सुबह स्टार्ट कीजिएगा, दोपहर में नहीं, सुबह स्टार्ट कर दीजिए, और जब बच्चे स्कूल से आए तब दोपहर में कर दीजिए. सो द बस कैन गो लाइक एट 7 o'clock, towards the school, and वापसी में 3:30 कर दीजिए, हमारे बच्चे ठीक हैं. So the women thought of the children and the school timing. What did the men, any guesses? What did the men want to time the bus for? Any guesses? Random, please. They wanted to time it according to the local ठेका timing. They said जब वो ठेका बंद होता है ना, बहुत मुश्किल होती है हमें वापस आने में, तो उसको जो जो बस है ना, वो रात के 10 बजे जरूर चलनी चाहिए. So this is what I'm saying. When you have women talking about what, this is why I say that this is the unique aspect of women policy makers, right? They will think about this. They will think about the welfare of the village, even as sarpanches and punches, women punches. So that at the central level, through in 1992, we had a constitutional amendment, and it introduced a third of reservation for women in local bodies and panchayats. Now, there have been proper studies done there which actually say that women headed, panchayats headed by women do better on social and not economic so far, but yes, social criteria like and health criterias as well. They do better than men led panchayats. So women as policy makers are definitely better, and they think of overall development. um Again, why do we need reservation is not just because of the women qualitatively what they bring to the table, but also if I represent 50% of the population, why shouldn't I represent my interests within the within parliament and legislative bodies? So that is how. Now, since women haven't grown organically, I think it is time that they are given that little push, at least for 2 elections, to increase their representation there.
We wouldn't want this conversation coming to an end. And so I would like to take a few questions if you have any.
Ma'am, you talked about the need of increasing women's representation in the parliament. But despite having 15% of the women parliamentarians, we didn't see any discussion or any sort of check on the executive when it comes to some sensitive cases like the Bilkis Bano convicts released. This was obviously a politically sensitive case, but this was also a stain on this country's face. This country togetherly failed with Bilkis Bano when her convicts were released. And we were expecting women parliamentarians to come together to question the government over such a hasty release of all those convicts and their release being celebrated by those in the power. So why don't you think that even if we increase the representation of women in the parliament, they are still being played by the men who are ruling them, or by the men who are their bosses, be it in the politics or in the corporate world?
So I know what you're talking about. That so there are two aspects to your question. One, I would address: are women leaders dictated to by their male this thing? Yes, they are. Yes, there absolutely are. So so the so my book ends with an epilogue where to cover Supriya Sule as a politician, I'd also traveled to Baramati, which is her constituency. So while I was on my way to Baramati, I stopped at this temple town which is called Jejuri. You may Google it later. So Jejuri is a temple town. Now I was met by this gentleman who was telling me that my biggest demand is that there should be the train should stop like for more than 5 minutes, and it's a temple town. All of those problems that a local person leader would tell me. So all this while, I he was very very concerned about the area, and so then he took me to his home and he says, let's have chai. And this lady, his wife, came up to me and she served us chai and everything. And that's when he introduced me to her and said, she is the counselor. All right. So it was the man who was dictating everything, who knew what was happening in the constituency. Now, since this he was the former corporator there. Now, since the constituency had got reserved for the woman candidate, because you know that you're aware that it is a rotation, right? So every third time it gets reserved for a woman candidate. So he had asked his wife to contest, and she had won. So I was a little surprised because that she's being governed by the husband, and this is much after, so 30 years after the reservation was introduced. Now, does that mean if I have a case? So I'll tell you another case. So I traveled through Chhattisgarh very recently, and I've been traveling to Chhattisgarh since 2017. Now, there was this. I was talking to some punches there. This guy introduced me. Ye SP hai. So I said SP. So you would think that superintendent of police, but obviously these were very rural settings, and that guy was, that gentleman was right there, and he looked like a person who was from the village. So I said SP. So he says, "Ye sarpanch pati hai." So sarpanch was a woman because the segment had been reserved for the woman. So he was being introduced. So do you realize that this is like is an informal formal designation now? PP yani panchpati, SP yani sarpanchpati, because the seat has been reserved, and this after 30 years of reservation. But at the same time, how many years has it been for dowry laws? Dowry laws can be misused, right? We are seeing misuse. Does that mean that we do away with dowry laws? No, we don't do that. Now, I genuinely feel that the first time it may not, reservation may not throw up women leaders in the true sense, right? It may not. Second cycle, it may not still, but the third cycle, it may just throw up. So, yes, we need more women. Since they have not grown organically, we need that push. It is the same reservation push that we have been giving to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, for the betterment of a deprived section of the society. Now, since you talked about Bilkis Bano very specifically, I hope you're aware of the rules that anything that is state matter related is not raised within the parliament, within the houses of parliament. So, yes, it was never raised inside parliament because of the rules. But was it raised outside? Yes. Parliamentarians had raised it outside. Yes, they had. They had even staged. So, there is an area within parliament which is near Gandhi Murti, and there are. They protested there. They had placards and everything. So they do have avenues. But it also brings me to a very vital point that you had raised. Do women raise these issues, empowerment issues within their party forum? Are they empowered enough to raise them? That's a very, I feel they usually toe the line of the party, and there's a very long way off that they can take up these issues. Is it self preservation? Most definitely self preservation. But there is also another aspect that I don't think women who reach that stature, that place, they treat themselves as women lead. They don't see themselves as women leaders. Like Indira Gandhi never thought of herself as a woman leader. Margaret Thatcher, no, she did not think of herself as a woman leader. In fact, I've written in the book also that Margaret Thatcher's biographer actually says that she never thought women were capable enough to take on cabinet roles. Same is with Indira Gandhi, that though she felt very strongly for women empowerment, though she thought that things should be gender neutral, she was far ahead of her times that she was living in. But she was very happy being called the only man in her cabinet. She was very happy.
पहले तो मैम किताब बाखुदा बहुत अच्छी लिखी है, खासकर उसमें जो एनेडोट है कि सुषमा स्वराज हर रोज किस तरीके की साड़ी पहन के जाएगी, खाने में क्या बनाएगी और उनकी डॉटर ने किस तरह लाल कृष्ण आडवाणी के लिए केक लेके गई, बाखुदा लिखा है मैम, वो जानकर पहले तो अच्छा लगा। और लास्टली ये जानना चाहेंगे, किताब में जिन नेताओं के बारे में आपने ज़िक्र किया है, वो कैसे तय किया? क्योंकि मैं जब किताब पढ़ रहा था उसमें राबड़ी देवी नहीं थे, पंजाब से हरसिमरत कौर नहीं थे, आनंदीबेन पटेल नहीं थे, महबूबा मुफ्ती नहीं थे,
जी।
उमा भारती भी नहीं थे। तो मैं बस ये जानना चाह रहा था कि
हाँ।
आपने कैसे
आप
तय
शायद आप शायद थोड़ा-सा लेट आए, मैंने शुरुआत इसी से की थी। मैं
सॉरी
फिर
मैम।
से नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं। थैंक यू फॉर रीडिंग। लेकिन मेरा मैंने ये बोला था एक कॉमन थ्रेड है। मैंने सबसे पहली चीज़ ये की थी कि 4 भागों में किताब बटी हुई है। तो मुझे इक्विटेबल चाहिए था। पहली बात, एक पॉपुलर इलेक्शन उन्होंने जीता हुआ होना चाहिए। दूसरी बात, सारी पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज़ को कंसिडर किया मैंने, जहाँ मैंने आम आदमी पार्टी इंक्लूड नहीं हुई है, व्हिच आई थिंक मे बी इन द सेकंड एडिशन लेटर। अ पहली बात थी सिवाय बृंदा कराट के सबने एक पॉपुलर इलेक्शन जीता है। बृंदा कराट को इसीलिए इंक्लूड किया क्योंकि लेफ्ट पार्टीज में से वो सबसे बड़ा नाम थी और सारी पार्टीज को मैंने इक्वल रिप्रेजेंटेशन देने की कोशिश की है। पॉपुलर इलेक्शन नहीं विन किया, इस हिसाब से मैंने उनको इंक्लूड नहीं किया। निर्मला सीतारमन को मैंने अभी पहले भी बात की थी। उमा भारती, क्योंकि भाजपा की बहुत अ, 2 लेडीज उसमें ऑलरेडी इंक्लूडेड थी। फिर मुझे ज्योग्राफिकल रिप्रेजेंटेशन, क्योंकि मैं हमेशा देखती हूँ, मेरा ये पर्सनल बिलीफ है कि ये जो होता है, जैसे ज्योग्राफिकल रिप्रेजेंटेशन में हमेशा हम लोग नॉर्थ ईस्ट को हमेशा निग्लेक्ट कर देते हैं। तो नॉर्थ ईस्ट को इंक्लूड करने के लिए ये मेरा बहुत बड़ा अटेम्प्ट था कि करना ही है। क्यों नहीं मैंने असम फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर को क्यों नहीं किया? क्योंकि कहीं मेरी ये कोशिश थी कि उन लोगों को इंक्लूड करूं जिनके बारे में ज़्यादा शायद लोग नहीं जानते हैं, इसलिए अम्परीन लिंगदो को किया। ये जस्ट एक कोइंसिडेंस कह सकते हैं कि जब बुक किताब शुरू की तब वो मंत्री नहीं थी, वो अभी रिसेंटली बनी है। तो ये एक कोइंसिडेंस था।
Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful words. In one of your interview, you have said that when you talk with the women who are in parliament or in legislature, you have said that rather than criticizing them on their policy making or in their policies, they do like the other parliamentarians or legislature do the character assassination of them.
Yes.
And so which makes difficult for the women to enter into politics. So what is your advice to young women who want to enter into politics or wanted to join the political scenario of India, when you talk with the women's in Indian politics, which are currently in Indian politics as well?
Thank you so much for asking this question. I'll make it absolutely, avenue neutral. Avenue in the sense that, see, character. I feel the easiest way to bring down a woman in any sphere, be it any workplace, not just in politics, is to assassinate her character, right? There's a beautiful quote by, Ambika Soni in this book where she said, you know, that she was very actively linked to Sanjay Gandhi, and she speaks about that entire episode as well. That why was she linked, and what was the truth to it? Was there any truth to it? So please do read that chapter. I feel so. She says that the easiest thing for a man to do is not to run faster than a woman, but to bring her down on her character. My advice is to, my honor is not that fragile that I need anyone to protect it. One, it's very, very essential, because at workplaces also you will face it. My honor is is mine. As long as I know I'm right, just keep going. I don't see anyone who can bring you down except yourself. People ask me often that, why, how did you write a book while working full time as a political journalist and raising 2 children? And obviously, I do credit my entire family for, I always say behind every dream that you have, a man, woman, or child, there is an entire ecosystem. I do believe that. And I sincerely believe that. Now, my thing is that nobody can bring you down unless it's you. You have to achieve what you have to achieve. And my advice is keep going. Keep going. I don't see why you should be brought down by anybody. Your honor is not that fragile that A, you need anyone to protect it. B, anyone who can just bring it down just like that.
Thank you very much, Nidhi, for speaking to all of us. And thank you to all the young members here who were in rapt attention all throughout and asked such lovely questions, such thought-provoking questions. I'm wishing you all the best for the second edition, and I'm also personally looking forward to
Thank you.
it, where you include all these women who've been talked about by
Yes,
your
yes.
audiences that they have
Yes.
not been given spaces.
Certainly.
Also, perhaps you can put in your views also of all the issues that were raised here, and maybe pose these questions to them as well,
Absolutely.
because their lived experiences do matter to all of us. With this, we bring this entire session to an end, and my personal observation through whatever I've inferred out of my own lived experiences is that women, when we are talking of women in politics, we are not talking of apolitical women. We are talking of political women. That these are also political beings. That they have their own politics. That they all have their own commitments, their own ideas, their own ideologies. And so to dissociate that from women and then expect them to only work for women or make their lives better is that's unfair, I believe. They are political first and maybe women later, and we can have a full lot of a whole lot of discussion over this. I don't know how much would Nidhi agree to it, but I'm pretty sure that when you were interviewing all these women, it must have appeared to you that these are women who are political first. They are political beings first.
So that is very strange that what I wanted to ask them was, since this gentleman also raised that issue, that he was very intrigued that how did Sushma Swaraj manage. So they weren't politicians first. I think they were individuals first, and they were always I was really intrigued by the fact that nobody asked them their personal feelings, and like, as a journalist also, for me, I would cover them as politicians and their politics and move out, right? I never wanted to know till I started writing the book that how do they manage their homes, which was a very interesting aspect. Smriti Irani talks about it as Sushma Swaraj. How did they manage their homes so efficiently while having full-time careers? Pratibha Patil speaks about, she says, till date, I feel that, working mother's guilt when I think about that time. So it's an intriguing journey that they, and intriguing life that they lead, and it needs to be told. The story needs to be told.
Yeah, the forever ensuing battle between the private and the public. With this, we bring the session to the end. Thank you so much for bearing all of us. Thank you so much.